Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. My name is Joey. I know a lot of MMA fans are super curious. Will we ever see Nick Diaz return to the UFC? And I thought it'd be fun to make a video about potential opponents for Nick Diaz. Also, Dana White did an interview with Yahoo Sports' Kevin Iole and was asked about whether or not Nick will ever return to the UFC. And I have some clips I'm going to play for you. It's crazy how often people are talking about, is Nick ever going to return? Nick has not fought since January of 2015, going on 6.5 years since he fought Anderson Silva. Both guys tested positive for different banned substance after the fight. Nick's was only marijuana. Anderson's obviously was, those PEDs, which I think they technically classify marijuana as a PED, but that's inaccurate. Nobody believes that. And since I think the rules have changed in some states, but that's besides the point. Has not fought since that loss to Anderson Silva, which is now a no contest. But it was a strange fight. He was laying down in the octagon, taunting Anderson. It was kind of an uneventful fight. I thought personally Anderson clearly won. I think most people did. He did get the decision up until he then tested positive and had the win taken away from him. But I wanted to give some insight on who I think could be a great potential opponent for Nick Diaz if he does return. And I've made a couple videos on this before, but I just figured it was super relevant. And I'm curious, leave in the comments, who would you like to see Nick Diaz fight if he does, in fact, return this year? But for me personally, I have two fights, that really I feel like make the most sense. One that I feel like just has to happen. If any of these fights happen, it really has to be this fight. But if you look at the top 10, okay, I'll go through some of the names in the top 10. Obviously, Nick Diaz is not going to return from a 6.5 year layoff and fight the champion, so Kamaru Usman's clearly out of the picture. Colby Covington's number one contender. According to the rankings, obviously, I don't believe that any guy has clearly earned a title shot at welterweight right now. It could go to any guy. But he's not going to fight Colby Covington. Colby's a top three guy, no matter where you put him. And also, that style is not going to be a style that is going to be conducive to Nick Diaz returning to the UFC in a fan-friendly fight. Gilbert Burns, same thing. He's not going to return against Gilbert Burns. But what's crazy is I'm not trying to shit on Nick Diaz, because if we know anything about the Diaz brothers, they want the toughest fights available to them at any point in time. I mean, look at Nick Diaz's last fights before he retired. GSP and Anderson Silva, two of the greatest. And, way closer to their primes than obviously are 7 years later. GSP dominated him. Anderson Silva beat him, but obviously he was on PEDs. Leon Edwards, obviously his brother Nate's fighting him. Wonderboy Thompson. Wonderboy's tied up with Burns. That would be a fun fight, though. Vicente Luque, I think that'd be a fun fight, but I don't think that's a fight that Nick Diaz is going to be looking for. It just doesn't do a lot for him. The name value isn't very much for Vicente Luque, even though he's an elite welterweight fighter. Michael Chiesa, same thing, plus the style. We all know the Diaz brothers have problems with heavy top game wrestlers. And it's just not something they're really looking to, especially at this point in his career, I don't think. Um, Number 7 is the guy that I think it's the fight the UFC has to make. Jorge Masvidal. I mean, there's a perfect story there. If you look at both guys' style, it would be a super fun fight. The fans would love it. Jorge Masvidal beat up Nick's little brother, Nate. Beat him up, ended up having a doctor stoppage. Nick did an interview last year, I believe it was. I think it was early last year with Ariel Helwani, where it was a very bizarre interview. But he did kind of allude that he wanted to fight Jorge Masvidal. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really the only fight the UFC should make. And I'm not going to go down the list anymore. Neil Magny, Damian Maia. No, I'm not even going to talk about that. The only other fight I personally would like to see, but I don't think is going to happen, I would like to see the Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler rematch. I think that would be a lot of fun. Stylistically, they fought when they were very, very young. So it would just be fun seeing that rematch get played back. But I think the only fight for Nick Diaz is Jorge Masvidal. I know there's some talk about, well, maybe he'll return to middleweight. I think he fought at middleweight a couple times at Strikeforce. His last fight in the UFC was against Anderson Silva at middleweight. But before I get into all that, let me play some clips for you. Here's Dana White's answer to whether or not Nick Diaz is going to return this year.
You know, Dan, a couple other things. Since we have Nate Diaz on this card, I'm assuming we're going to see Nick Diaz in the corner, which brings the question up, does Nick Diaz come back? I mean, I know I keep telling people he's not going to come back. It's been 6 years plus since he's last fought, 2015. But I know there's been talk he's going. Recently, any talk and anything with Nick recently?
It's looking like he might fight this year. You know me. Every time you ask me, I say no, no, no. He actually might fight this year. We'll see how this thing plays out.
So there you heard it straight from Dana White. We'll see how this thing plays out, but it's looking like he's going to fight this year. Normally, I wouldn't necessarily take Dana's word for it, but basically this answer for me, we already know that Nick has said he kind of wants to come back. This goes to show me that they've had some type of discussions and they're not far apart, as far as getting a deal done to, how much they're going to pay Nick to come back and have another fight. I mean, Nick is clearly a huge star for the UFC. People have been, there's no other guys that are going to sit out for 6.5 years and people are still going to clamor to see them return to the UFC. Maybe GSP, and, GSP's been out, I think, since 2016, if I remember correctly. But I don't even know if they talk about him as much as they're talking about Nick. And obviously, Nick's been out far longer, almost extra 2 years, basically, because he was January of 2015. So the UFC knows, and especially if Nick Diaz can get in there and get a win over a quality guy. If he can go in there and beat a number 7 ranked Jorge Masvidal, Dana White will find a way to get this man a title shot. Not that I necessarily agree with that, but I know he will find a way to do that. And it's just a fight that makes a lot of sense. So I was talking to the point, Nick's last fight was at middleweight. And, are some people going to say, oh, is he going to come back and fight at middleweight? He's getting older, cutting weight is harder. Kevin Iole asked that to Dana White. And here I want to play a clip for you, what Dana White has to say to that. And I agree with Dana in this aspect. So check that clip out.
What weight class would you talk at if he came back?
I'm assuming he'll come back at 170.
Because he fought at 185 his last fight against Anderson.
Yeah, I don't think you want to fight at 185 here. I get it. He wanted to do the Anderson Silva thing, but you don't want to fight at 185 here. No way. Especially after not fighting for 6 years. 170 is bad enough.
Yeah. For 6.5 years, that's crazy.
So there you go. Dana says, I'm assuming he'll come back at 170. I mean, and I agree with him 100%. Who is Nick Diaz going to fight at 185 that he's not going to get slaughtered by? I mean, look at some of these names. Kelvin Gastelum, Uriah Hall, Jack Hermanson, terrible matchup for him. Derek Brunson, terrible matchup for him. Jared Cannonier, that'd be kind of fun, but I still think Jared Cannonier is far too big for Nick Diaz. Obviously, Marvin Vettori's fighting for the belt. Robert Whittaker is going to be fighting for the belt. Paulo Costa, oh, no way. Oh, that would be a brutal beatdown by Paulo Costa. There's also been talk previously of a potential Khamzat Chimaev fight. And I think that fight would be fun, especially considering the Diaz brothers do like to come, and fight tough challenges. And Khamzat has a big name. He kind of blew up last year, but then he kind of faded away a little bit with, being out for so long and pulling out of so many fights. But just the matchup there, I just don't think that's a fight the Diaz brothers are willing to take. Nick Diaz is not going to want to take that fight. Khamzat's just heavy wrestling style I just don't think it would fare very well for him. Him being an older guy coming in and fighting a killer like Khamzat Chimaev, depending on how he looks, post, being sick and whatnot and being out for so long. But I'm curious, what does everyone else think? Who do you think Nick Diaz should fight? I'm personally, kind of curious to see him return. I think he will return this year, at least if not for one more paycheck. I don't know if, he really wants to try to be the best in the world or fight for a title, but I think he will return for a big fight. It could be a co-main event on a pay-per-view, make a big paycheck, and then maybe disappear for, the rest of his career. Because, he's up there in age. 7-year layoff almost. I think he'll return for maybe one more fight, and I think Jorge Masvidal is the fight to make. We've already seen from Jorge Masvidal, he said that is a fight he would love to take. He wants a little bit of time after the Kamaru Usman fight. Obviously, he was brutally KO'd in that fight, so he's going to want to take some time off. But I just really think that's the one true option. It's just Nick Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal at 170. Jorge Masvidal is a 170er, but he's pretty much was a career lightweight, so he's on the smaller side of the 170ers. And Nick is kind of the same thing. He's not an extremely large 170er. He's kind of like middle of the road. Where Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns, Wonder Boy, I don't know how Gilbert Burns ever made 155. Are all huge 170ers, especially Kamaru Usman's probably the biggest at 170. But let me know, who do you want to see Nick Diaz fight? Are you interested to see him return? Because I'm kind of iffy on it. He's kind of made some bizarre interviews. I don't know if he really is in it, because he wants to fight again, or maybe he wants a paycheck. He's been out for so long. But I'm kind of curious, but at the same time, I'm not very optimistic that this is going to end very well. Let me know in the comments. Make sure to like the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.